Hey guys, tonight we're getting dressed up for something truly dreadful. An evening among the fashionable elite of the 1700s, not the cosy candlelit fantasy with a string quartet and someone plucking a harpsichord in the corner. I mean the real thing, where the food is quietly seasoned with lead. The wine has been improved by people you would not trust to hold your coat, and your host would sooner perish than let you sit one seat above your social station. Before we begin, a genuine thank you to the kind soul who suggested tonight's topic. If you enjoy these late-night wanderings through history, feel free to like the video and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it is always the small hours somewhere. If you would like to support the channel a little further, membership is already available, and it gives you access to 8 hours of ad-free video. All my drifting and none of the interruptions. Perfect for a night when you would rather not be woken by anything at all. The channel is also on Spotify now, so if you would rather drift off with just my voice and no screen glowing in your face, the link is waiting in the description. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and loosen whatever is currently digging into your ribs, because the people we're about to meet did not have that option. Let us pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to attend a grand dinner in the 1700s? Could you survive an evening where a single wrong fork could stain your family name for a generation? Would you know what to do when the lady beside you asks you to help her to a slice of something grey, quivering, and possibly still judging you? Could you sit upright for 4 hours in a whalebone corset, smiling graciously, while being slowly poisoned by your own face powder? Would you last a single toast in a room where refusing a drink was practically a declaration of war? And what precisely happens once the ladies leave the table and the gentlemen reach for the chamber pot tucked inside the sideboard? We will get to that. Oh, we will absolutely get to that. But first, congratulations. You have just woken up in 1785. Your stays are already too tight, your wig weighs roughly as much as a small dog, and you're expected at dinner in 3 hours. Good luck. Let us begin where every Georgian ordeal begins, with a small, elegant card arriving at your door. It looks harmless enough, all looping ink and flattering phrases, but do not be fooled. That invitation is a summons, an examination, and a trap folded into one tidy rectangle. Accepting means committing to an entire evening of performance. Declining means insulting someone who very likely controls your family's future. There is no polite third option, no medieval version of leaving someone on read. You're going, and everyone already knows it. The card itself is a puzzle. It arrives written in a hand so ornate that reading it feels like decoding a treaty, and the phrasing is so buttered with courtesy that you must translate it back into plain meaning. Request the honour of your company does not mean we would enjoy seeing you. It means attend or be discussed. And you will be discussed either way, so you may as well be discussed while present to defend yourself. Now the calculations begin. Who else is invited? You do not know, and you cannot simply ask, because asking suggests you care who is above you, which of course you do, desperately, but admitting it is fatal. So you dispatch a servant to gently interrogate another household servant, and through this whispering network of below-stairs espionage, you assemble a guest list the way a general assembles enemy troop positions. It is reconnaissance dressed as gossip. Then comes the reply, which must be composed with the care of a legal contract. Accept too eagerly, and you look starved for society. Accept too coolly, and you insult the host. There is a precise temperature at which enthusiasm is correct, and hitting it wrong scalds you either way. Imagine agonizing for an hour over whether to reply to a text with one exclamation point or two, except the stakes are your entire family standing and the message is delivered by a boy on foot. You must also weigh the invitation against every other social obligation currently orbiting your life. Have you already promised yourself to a rival household that same evening? Choosing between two hosts is choosing which one to offend because the snubbed party will absolutely find out. Word travels through this world faster than any coach, and it always travels downhill toward the person you least wanted to hear it. There is no discretion. There's only delay before exposure, and the invitation carries hidden clauses no one prints on the card. It implies you own the correct clothes, which you may not. It implies you can arrive by an acceptable conveyance, which you may not afford. It implies you know the other guests, the house, the customs, the 1,000 invisible rules of the specific table you're about to join. An invitation is not merely a welcome. It is a bill for everything you must now scramble to become before the appointed hour. So you accept, because refusing is worse, and immediately the dread sets in. You have not eaten a single bite, you have not powdered a single inch of your face, and already the evening feels less like a dinner and more like a summons to court. Somewhere across town your host is doing precisely the same math about you, wondering if you are worth the trouble, the seat, the good silver. The truly cruel part is that this little card, this featherweight scrap of paper, has just rearranged your entire week, and the meal it promises has not even been cooked yet. You have simply agreed, in writing, to spend an evening being judged by professionals. That is the Georgian invitation. It is a trap that thanks you for stepping into it. It is time to get dressed, which in the 1780s is less like putting on clothes and more like being slowly assembled by a committee of grim-faced servants. First come the stays, laced so tightly that breathing becomes more of a suggestion than a habit. Then the layers, the petticoats or the breeches, the stockings held up by garters that leave rings in your skin for days. Everything itches, everything pinches, and nothing is designed for a human who intends to sit down comfortably. By the time you're finished, you are upholstered rather than dressed, and you still have to do your hair. Let us start with the stays, because they set the tone for the entire evening. These are stiffened with strips of whalebone, and they are laced from behind by someone who cannot see your face, and therefore cannot see you wince. The goal is a fashionable posture, rigid and upright, the torso reshaped into a smooth cone that has never once occurred in nature. You do not so much wear stays as get installed into them. Bending at the waist becomes a fond memory. Reaching for a dropped fork later will be a full engineering problem. If you are a woman, the layers pile on from there. A shift against the skin, then the stays, then petticoats, then possibly a hooped structure to hold your skirts out to a width that makes doorways a genuine navigational challenge. By the end you occupy roughly the floor space of a small dining table, and you will spend the evening quietly calculating angles so as not to knock a candlestick into someone's powdered head. If you are a man, do not smirk. Your breeches are cut so snug that sitting is a negotiation, your waistcoat is buttoned to attention, and your coat is stiff enough to stand up on its own in the corner should you step out of it. Your stockings must be pulled taut and utterly smooth, because a wrinkled stocking is a visible confession of carelessness, and carelessness is a sin in this room. You are trussed as thoroughly as any bird on the table you're about to sit before. Everything is made of natural fibres that have been worn before and washed rarely, so there is a certain lived-in fragrance to the whole ensemble before you have even begun to sweat into it. And you will sweat into it copiously once the candles and the crowd and the wine get to work. The clothes are heavy, the room will be hot, and there is no version of this evening in which you remain cool and dry. You're dressing for a sauna you must attend with perfect posture. The comparison that comes to mind is squeezing into an outfit 2 sizes too small for an important event, except you cannot loosen anything. You cannot slip off your shoes under the table, and there is a servant standing behind you, noting whether your seams are straight. It is shapewear as a moral test. Comfort was simply never on the menu, and admitting discomfort would be the height of bad breeding. By the time the committee steps back to inspect their work, you are magnificent and miserable in equal measure. You cannot breathe deeply, you cannot slouch, and you cannot escape. You are a monument to your own social ambition, held together by whalebone, string, and the collective effort of people paid to make you look effortless. And here is the truly cruel twist. All of this, the pinching, the lacing, the sweating, the careful architecture of your appearance is merely the base layer. You have handled the body. Now you must deal with the head, and the head is where the real horror begins. Let us talk about your hair, or rather, the towering powdered structure you're about to balance on your skull for the entire evening. Wigs and elaborate hairstyles in this era were tall, heavy, and dusted with powder made from flour and starch, which meant your head was essentially a snack for any passing insect. Some styles took hours to build and were left up for days, occasionally weeks, which is exactly as hygienic as it sounds. You will sit very still, hold your neck very straight, and pray nothing takes up residence. It is a hat made of your own vanity, and it is watching you fail. The construction is a marvel of misplaced ambition. Your own hair, or a wig, or some uneasy alliance of both, is teased, pinned, and built upward over pads and frames until it achieves a height that serves no purpose except to announce that you can afford to build it. The taller the tower, the grander the statement, and grandeur here is measured in how much of a hazard your own head becomes in a low doorway. Then comes the powder, and this is where the trouble deepens. It is flung on with a bellows in a small cloud that coats the hair, the shoulders, the room, and quite possibly the servant applying it. The powder is often made from finely ground starch, and it is scented to disguise the fact that the hair beneath it has not been washed in an unnervingly long time. You are in effect seasoning your own scalp like a piece of meat, and then wearing it out to dinner. Because these styles took so long to erect, the fashionable did not dismantle them nightly. They kept them up for days, sometimes for weeks, propped delicately on special stands during sleep, maintained rather than remade, and a warm structure of flour, fat, and scented pomade, worn continuously and never cleaned, becomes exactly the sort of neighbourhood that small crawling things love to move into. Your head is not just styled, it is zoned for residential development. This is why you may notice, tucked among the accessories of the truly stylish, a long, slender rod. It is a scratching stick, designed specifically to reach up into the towering edifice and relieve an itch without collapsing the whole monument. Pause on that. The hairstyle was so tall, so elaborate, and so populated that a dedicated tool existed purely to scratch inside it discreetly at the dinner table. It is the 18th century's most damning piece of evidence, and people carried it proudly. The physical toll is its own quiet comedy. Your neck aches from holding the weight upright. Your peripheral vision is partly walled off by your own hair. You cannot lean back, you cannot lie down, and you certainly cannot laugh too vigorously without endangering the entire structure. Imagine wearing a stiff, heavy hat you are not allowed to remove, that you did not choose the shape of, and that you privately suspect is alive. That is your evening. And should you pass beneath a chandelier, that warm cloud of flour and fat sits perilously close to open flame. There are genuine accounts of these grand hairstyles catching light, which turns a fashion statement into an emergency in a matter of seconds. You're wearing a bonfire risk on your head to a room heated entirely by candles. Nobody seems especially concerned about this. So you sit, upright and radiant, crowned in scented flour and quiet dread, hoping the thing above your ears behaves for a few more hours. Your face, at least, will be simpler. your face will merely be poisoned. Now for your face, because in Georgian high society pale is fashionable. Not sun-avoiding pale, but deathly. Corpse in winter, freshly fainted pale. To achieve this coveted look, the wealthy smeared their skin with a white paste often made from white lead, a substance we now understand to be enthusiastically toxic. It cracked, it corroded the skin beneath it, and over time it could genuinely poison you. So you would apply more to hide the damage the last coat had caused. It was skincare as slow-motion sabotage, and everyone agreed you looked marvellous. The logic behind the paleness is its own small tragedy. A tanned face meant you laboured outdoors, and labour meant you were poor, and being thought poor was a fate worse than most illnesses. So the goal was to look as though you had never once encountered sunlight, fresh air, or an honest day's work. The whiter you were, the more clearly you announced that other people did your suffering for you. Nothing says wealth quite like resembling something recently exhumed. The paste itself is smoothed over the face, the neck, and the upper chest until you achieve a flat, matte, uniform white. Over this go touches of colour, a red for the lips and cheeks that was frequently no safer than the white beneath it, sometimes derived from its own charming assortment of toxic minerals. So your entire visible surface, the part of you meant to charm the room, is a thin decorative crust of poison, applied with great care and a small brush. Here is the truly grim part. The lead paste damages the very skin it sits on. Over time it eats away at the complexion, leaving marks, scarring, and a greyish ruin underneath. And the fashionable solution to skin damaged by white lead was, of course, more white lead, troweled on thicker to hide the wreckage the last coat caused. It is a repair job that guarantees the next repair job. You're patching a leak with the same water that sprang it. The effect worsens as the evening does. This coating was not built for a hot candlelit room full of sweating bodies. As the heat climbs, the paint begins to crack, to slide, to settle into the fine lines of your face. By the second hour, the smooth porcelain mask you arrived in has started its slow migration south, and there is nothing to be done about it in polite company. You cannot exactly excuse yourself to reapply an entire face. You simply smile through the fractures. Think of it as the world's worst full coverage foundation, one that not only fails to breathe but actively corrodes what it covers, applied daily in ever thicker layers by people who believed it made them beautiful. And in fairness, by the standards of the room, it did. Everyone was doing the same slow damage to themselves, so the ravaged complexion beneath everyone's paint became a shared secret nobody discussed. The eyebrows deserve a mention, because some of the truly committed shaved theirs off entirely and replaced them with small strips of trimmed mouse fur glued into place. When the fashion for a high pale forehead demanded it, real eyebrows were an inconvenience, so off they came, and on went the mice. You're wearing rodents above your eyes and poison across your cheeks, and you have not yet left for dinner. So you regard yourself in the glass, pale as a ghost and just as doomed, and you decide you look rather well. The face that will greet the guest tonight is a careful lie painted over a slow injury. It will crack, it will run, and it will very gradually make you ill. But it is fashionable, and fashion in this world is worth dying a little for. You're dressed, you're powdered, and you already regret being born. Now, you actually have to arrive. If you're fashionable, you travel by sedan chair, which means 2 men carry you through the streets in a padded box while you try not to be jostled into your neighbour's lap. If you go by carriage, you contend with mud, potholes, and streets that double as open drains. At night, a link boy walks ahead with a flaming torch to light the way, and you simply trust that this child is not leading you into an alley to be robbed. Sometimes he is. Welcome to Georgian ride-sharing. Consider the sedan chair first because it is the elegant option, and elegant here is doing enormous work. It is a small enclosed box with a seat inside lifted on 2 long poles by 2 hired men, one at the front and one at the back. You climb in, they hoist you up, and off you go, swaying through the streets at the pace of 2 tired strangers. Every uneven cobble transmits directly into your spine. Your towering hair brushes the ceiling. Your painted face must remain composed while your entire body is gently shaken like a jar of preserves. The men carrying you are not gentle by design. They are simply trying to get you there and collect their fee before the next fare. If they stumble, you feel it. If they quarrel, you hear it. And should they set you down harder than intended, your grand entrance begins with an ungraceful lurch out of a box, wig askew, dignity trailing behind you like a dropped glove. You have paid good money to be delivered like a parcel. The carriage, meanwhile, offers a different flavour of misery. The streets are not paved for comfort, and in this era they frequently serve as the primary route for everything the city wishes to be rid of. Waste, mud, and rainwater pool and mingle in the roadway, and your fine wheels churn through all of it. A carriage ride is a percussion concert of jolts and lurches, and the smell rising from the street is a faithful companion the entire way. You arrive rattled, splashed, and grateful to be upright. Now add the darkness, because grand dinners run late, and the Georgian street at night is not a lit place. There are no street lamps as we would understand them, just pools of gloom broken here and there by a window's glow. So you hire a link boy, a child or a youth who walks ahead of you carrying a burning torch of pitch, lighting your path through the black. He is your headlight, your guide, and your only defence against walking directly into the drain. The trouble is that the link boy knows the streets far better than you do, including the streets you would rather avoid. There were persistent worries, not without foundation, that some link boys led their well-dressed clients not toward the party, but toward a convenient dark corner where accomplices waited to relieve them of their valuables. Your trusted guide with the flame may be leading you home or leading you to be robbed, and you will not know which until the decisive moment. It is a ride share where the driver might also be the mugger, so you proceed through the dark, swaying and splashing, following a flame held by a stranger, trusting entirely to luck. Every footfall is a small gamble. You are overdressed, weighed down, and largely defenceless, moving through a city that has made few arrangements for your safety, and even fewer for your comfort. And this is merely the commute. You have not greeted your host, navigated the drawing room, or discovered where you're permitted to sit. You have simply survived the trip, arriving flustered and faintly perfumed with the street. The evening's true trials wait politely inside, warmed by candlelight, sharpening their forks. You have survived the streets, which is more than can be said for your shoes. Now comes the waiting. Guests gather first in the drawing room, where you stand about making delicate conversation, while secretly assessing everyone's rank, wealth, and threat level. This is the pre-dinner mingling, the Georgian equivalent of hovering awkwardly near the snack table before a meeting begins. You smile, you bow, you compliment a hat you privately find hideous. And underneath it all, one anxious question hums in every skull. Where exactly am I going to be seated? The drawing room is where the evening's performance truly opens, and the curtain rises the moment you step through the door. You are announced, all eyes flick toward you, and in the space of a single heartbeat, every person present has assessed your clothes, your posture, your company, and your standing. You do the same to them. It is a room full of people conducting simultaneous silent appraisals, while smiling warmly and saying how lovely it is to see one another. The greetings themselves are a choreography with strict steps. There is a correct depth of bow, a correct inclination of the head, a correct order in which to acknowledge people according to their rank. Greet a higher personage too casually and you insult them. Greet a lower one too warmly, and you confuse the hierarchy everyone is working so hard to maintain. Every hello is a small calculation, and you are performing dozens of them in quick succession, while your painted face slowly warms in the crowded room. Then comes the conversation, which must be pleasant, weightless, and utterly free of anything real. You discuss the weather. You admire the room. You praise a lady's gown or a gentleman's horses. You compliment a hat that is, in your honest opinion, an assault on the eyes, because honesty here is a luxury nobody can afford. It is small talk raised to the level of an athletic event, and everyone is quietly keeping score. All the while, the true drama plays out beneath the surface. You're watching who speaks to whom, who is ignored, who arrived with whom, and who has been placed near the fire, and who has been left by the draught. Alliances and slights are being read like weather signs. A cool nod exchanged across the room might be the opening move of a feud that has been simmering for years. You're attending a garden party and a chess match at the same time, and only one of them is announced. And beneath even that runs the single question gnawing at every guest present. Where will I sit? Because the seating at dinner is not random, and it is not kind. It is a public ranking of everyone in the room, delivered in the form of chairs, and you will learn your exact position in the eyes of your host the instant the doors to the dining room open. Until then, you mingle, you smile, and you wait to find out how the evening intends to rate you. The waiting stretches on, warm and perfumed and faintly tense, as latecomers arrive and the room fills. Your feet, crammed into fashionable shoes, begin to remind you of the walk from the carriage. Your stays make standing upright the only tolerable position anyway. You sip nothing, because dinner has not begun, and you talk and talk and talk about absolutely nothing of consequence. Think of it as networking at an event where you know almost no one. Everyone outranks you in a system you barely understand, and the reward for small talk is being told at last exactly how little the host thinks of you. Then, at some silent signal, the moment arrives. The dining room doors are opened, and the terrible invisible mathematics of who goes in first is about to be made brutally visible. Before a single morsel is eaten, there is the delicate and genuinely dangerous matter of who enters the dining room first, and in precisely what order. Georgian society ran on a strict ladder of rank, and seating you above someone who outranked you could ignite a feud that outlived everyone at the table. Hostesses agonized over this like generals planning a campaign. Get it wrong and you have not made a small mistake. You have committed a social crime. There is a whole invisible hierarchy in the room, and you are expected to have memorized it. You have not. The principle is called precedence, and it governs everything. Who walks in first, who sits nearest the host, who is seated closest to the head of the table, and who is banished to the distant end near the door. Rank was not a vague matter of who seemed important. It was a precise ordered system, and everyone in the room carried their exact position in it, the way we might carry a name. The seating simply made that position visible to all, so the procession into dinner becomes a public announcement of everyone's worth. The highest-ranking guests go first, paired off and escorted with ceremony, and the rest fall into line behind them in descending order of importance. If you're near the front, the room knows you matter. If you're shuffling in at the back, the room knows that too. It is a ranking of human beings performed as a slow, dignified walk, and you cannot hide your place in it. For the hostess, arranging all of this was a genuine ordeal that began long before the guests arrived. She had to know the precise standing of every single person invited, weigh their claims against one another, and seat them in an order that offended no one. This was not merely good manners, A guest seated below someone they considered their inferior might take it as a deliberate insult, and such insults were remembered, nursed, and occasionally repaid across years. She was defusing a bomb with a seating plan, and the rules were maddeningly specific. Rank could shift depending on title, on marriage, on office, on a dozen fine distinctions that meant two guests of seemingly similar standing might in fact have a clear order between them that only the truly informed would know. Getting these gradations wrong was not forgivable ignorance. It was proof you did not belong. The hostess who misjudged it might find her table simmering with quiet fury over the fish course. For you, freshly arrived and only dimly aware of where you fall in all this, the moment of procession is pure exposure. You wait to be placed, and in being placed, you are judged. There's no arguing, no swapping seats, no cheerful, I will just sit anywhere. Sitting anywhere is unthinkable. The chair you're led to is the host's official verdict on your importance, delivered in front of everyone with no right of appeal. Imagine arriving at a gathering and being told, publicly and without discussion, exactly how important everyone considers you to be, then being seated accordingly for all to see, with the most important people beside the host and the least important parked by the exit. Now imagine that getting this ranking wrong could start a grudge that outlasts a marriage. That is precedence. It turned a seating chart into a loaded weapon. So you take your assigned place wherever it falls, and you arrange your face into serene acceptance whether you're honoured or quietly humiliated. The mathematics of rank has done its work, and you have been sorted. Now, at last, you may look at the table itself, which has been waiting through all of this, groaning under a quantity of food so absurd that survival becomes a fresh problem entirely. The doors swing open, and there it is, the table, buckling under more food than your entire street would see in a season. In this era, dinner was served in the French style, which meant dozens of dishes arranged all at once across the table in a grand symmetrical display. Roasts, pies, jellies, vegetables, sauces, and things you cannot identify, all placed at the same time in a dazzling edible landscape. It looks like abundance. It is really an obstacle course, and nobody's going to hand you a plate. Let us talk about how a grand dinner was actually served, because it is nothing like the tidy parade of courses you might expect. In this fashion, an entire array of dishes was set out on the table together, arranged with careful symmetry so that the whole spread formed a single impressive picture. The point was not convenience. The point was spectacle. You were meant to walk in and be struck breathless by the sheer groaning excess of it before a single bite was taken. The arrangement followed rules of balance and display, dishes placed to mirror one another across the table, tall centerpieces anchoring the design, sauces and side dishes filling the gaps. It was less a meal and more an installation, composed to be admired from above like a garden. A great deal of thought and labour went into making the food beautiful before anyone was permitted to disturb it by eating. The first course of a grand dinner was in effect looking, but here is the practical catch that makes the whole thing quietly stressful. With every dish laid out at once, there was no army of servants circling to spoon food onto your plate. You were expected to help yourself from the dishes within your reach, and just as importantly, to help the people seated near you. The magnificent spread was not delivered to you. It simply sat there, and reaching it was your problem to solve. This means your dining experience was dictated almost entirely by geography. Whatever dishes happened to sit near your place were the dishes available to you, and dishes at the far end of the table might as well have been in another county. You could admire the roast 3 feet beyond your reach, but you could not have it, not without a complicated relay of polite requests passed hand to hand down the table like a very slow, very fragile bucket brigade. So the beautiful symmetrical spread reveals its true nature. It is a landscape you must navigate, with your options fenced in by the length of your arm and the goodwill of your neighbours. A guest seated near the finest dishes dined very well. A guest marooned beside the boiled vegetables, and a dish of something grey made the best of a limited situation. Your seat, chosen for you by the merciless mathematics of rank, has also just quietly decided your dinner. Think of an enormous buffet, except you're not allowed to get up. You can only eat what sits within arm's reach, and you're also personally responsible for serving whoever is stuck beside you. The abundance is real and staggering, but access to it is a lottery, and the winning tickets were handed out during the seating you had no say in. All that food, and you may only touch your small allotted corner of the feast. And the abundance itself is a message. This much food, far more than any table could finish, was a deliberate boast of the host's wealth. Waste was the entire point. You are meant to be overwhelmed by plenty, to see leftovers on a scale that would have fed a village, and to understand that your host can afford exactly that. Now, having grasped the scale of it, you must actually begin to eat, which is where the true test of the evening take hold. Here is a delightful surprise. With everything laid out at once, you're largely expected to serve yourself and, more importantly, to serve the people near you. Whatever dish sits within your reach is now your responsibility. Someone across the table wants the pigeon pie you're guarding. You must carve it and pass it along without flinging gravy onto a countess. There is an unspoken choreography to all of this, a silent etiquette of offering and accepting. Nobody explained the rules to you. Everyone will notice that. The dish nearest to you is not merely your food. It is your post, your duty, your small kingdom to administer. Convention held that a guest served from the dish before them, offering portions first to those nearby, particularly to any lady seated at their side, before taking any for themselves. You are not just a diner. You've been quietly appointed the steward of whatever happens to sit in front of you, and stewardship is judged. This turns eating into a constant exchange of small favours. You offer a slice of what you command to your neighbour. Your neighbour offers you a portion of what they command in return. A dish 2 places away must be requested politely and passed along hand to hand, with everyone participating in its careful journey. The whole table is engaged in a slow, murmured trade in food, a genteel barter economy conducted with serving spoons and gracious nods, and some of these dishes require actual skill to serve. Carving was a genuine accomplishment, an art with its own techniques, and a gentleman was often expected to carve the joint or the bird set before him with confidence and grace. Now picture yourself, laced into your stays, painted, sweating, wig looming overhead, attempting to neatly carve a roasted bird you have never met, in front of an audience of your social superiors, without spraying juices across the fine linen, or, heaven forbid, a titled lady's sleeve. It is public speaking, except the podium is a dead goose. The choreography extends to how much you take, and this is its own trap. Serve yourself too generously and you look greedy, grasping, unfamiliar with plenty. Serve yourself too little, and you may insult the dish, the cook, or the host who provided it. There is a correct, moderate portion, and it exists somewhere in a narrow band you must locate by instinct, because no one will ever tell you where it lies. You're threading a needle with a serving spoon. Underneath the pleasant surface, then, runs a continuous current of evaluation. Do you offer before you take? Do you handle the serving implements with ease or fumble them like a child? Do you know, without being told, that the lady beside you should be attended to first? Every small motion at the table is a data point, and the assembled company is quietly gathering all of them into a verdict about whether you truly belong here. The cruelty is that none of this was written down for you to study. The rules of serving, offering, and portioning were absorbed over a lifetime by those raised inside this world, passed along like breathing. There was no manual handed to newcomers, no discreet card by your plate. You were simply expected to know, and any evidence that you did not know was the most telling thing about you. Ignorance was not forgiven. It was noted, so you carve when you must, offer before you take, accept with a gracious nod, and try to move through the meal as though this silent dance is second nature to you. It is not. You're improvising every step while pretending you've known the choreography since childhood. And you have barely lifted your spoon before the very first true course arrives, a soup that will introduce you to just how strange this evening's menu intends to be. Many grand dinners open with soup, and if your host is truly determined to impress, that soup is made from turtle. Real sea turtle, shipped in alive at enormous expense and turned into the most fashionable dish of the age. It was a status symbol served in a bowl, a way of announcing wealth through broth. For you, it is simply the first of many moments where you nod politely and pretend this is normal. You sip carefully, you murmur approval, and you try very hard not to think about the animal that made the journey so you could look impressed. Turtle soup was the height of fashion among the wealthy in this period, and its appeal lay almost entirely in how difficult and expensive it was to produce. The turtles were brought in by ship from far across the ocean, transported alive over enormous distances, which meant only a household with real money and real connections could set one before its guests. The soup did not merely taste of turtle, it tasted of the host's bank balance. The preparation was an ordeal in itself, a laborious affair that occupied a kitchen for the better part of a day, involving the large creature and a great deal of skilled, unpleasant work well out of sight of the guests. What arrived at your bowl was the polished final act of a long and grisly performance staged below stairs. You would sip it delicately and compliment its richness, blissfully spared the knowledge of everything that had gone into producing it. For the truly ambitious host who craved the prestige without the ruinous cost, there was a clever imitation. A dish arose that mimicked the flavour and texture of the real thing using the head and other parts of a calf, seasoned to resemble its far grander cousin. It let a household gesture at the fashionable turtle without importing an actual turtle, a bit of culinary sleight of hand that let the aspiring appear more lavish than their means strictly allowed. Even the fakery was a status game. Your job as a guest, whether the soup is genuine turtle or its cunning imposter, is identical. You lift your spoon with the correct grip, you sip without slurping, you do not tip the bowl, and you offer a small murmur of appreciation regardless of what your tongue is actually reporting. The soup could taste of glory or of warm disappointment, and your face must register only refined pleasure. This is the first course, and it is also the first test of your ability to lie graciously with your expression. There is a quiet absurdity to the whole ritual that no one at the table will acknowledge. A creature was carried alive across an ocean, at tremendous cost and considerable suffering, so that a room full of powdered, corseted people could nod approvingly at a bowl of broth and silently note how rich the host must be. The soup is not really food. It is a boast that happens to be edible, ladled out one prestigious spoonful at a time. Imagine a dish that exists chiefly so the person serving it can demonstrate they were able to obtain it, where the flavour matters far less than the difficulty and expense of getting it to the table at all. That is the turtle soup, and it sets the tone for everything to come. Nearly every dish tonight will carry a hidden second purpose beneath the first. To feed you, yes, but mostly to impress you. So you finish your soup, set your spoon down in the correct position, and brace yourself. If the opening course was a whole ocean voyage rendered into broth, You can only imagine what the host has arranged for the main event. The answer, it turns out, is meat, in quantities and varieties that border on the deranged, arranged to look almost alive again and staring right back at you. Now comes the flesh, and there is a truly astonishing amount of it. Roasted beef, mutton, venison, hare, pheasant, capons and game birds arranged in glistening ranks across the table. For the wealthy, meat was the loud, boastful centerpiece of the meal, and the more varieties on offer, the grander the host appeared. You will be expected to sample widely and complain never. Somewhere in this feast is a bird that has been dressed to look almost alive again. You will meet its little glazed eyes. You will keep chewing. Meat was the true measure of a great table, and the wealthy piled it on in a quantity that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with pride. A grand dinner might present beef and mutton alongside venison from a private park, hare from the fields, and a whole aviary of birds all crowded onto the same groaning surface. The variety itself was the message. Anyone could serve a joint of meat, only the truly rich could serve 6 kinds at once. The birds in particular tell you where you are on the social ladder. Game like venison and certain wild birds carried real prestige, because the right to hunt them was jealously guarded and legally restricted, tied to land and rank in ways an ordinary person could never access. To serve venison was to announce, however silently, that you or your host owned or commanded the land it came from. The pheasant on your plate is not just dinner, it is a property deed with feathers. Then there is the presentation, which occasionally tips over into the genuinely unsettling. Cooks took pride in restoring birds to something resembling their living appearance, roasting them and then redressing them in their own feathers, propping them upright, arranging them to look poised and lifelike upon the platter. A peacock or a swan might arrive looking almost ready to take flight, which is a striking centerpiece and also a small horror, depending on how much wine you've had. So you find yourself confronted, over the course of the meal, by a whole menagerie of dead things arranged to appear not quite dead enough. You will lock eyes with a glazed bird, you will be offered a slice of something that still, disconcertingly, has a face, and you must accept it all with the serene appreciation of a person who finds nothing at all peculiar about dining beside a refeathered fowl, staring wistfully across the table. The expectation is that you sample broadly. To take from only one dish, when so many have been provided at such expense, could read as a quiet criticism of the rest, and criticizing the host's abundance is unthinkable. So you accept a little of this and a little of that, building a plate that acknowledges the sheer generosity on display, whether or not your stomach has any interest in a 4th variety of bird. Eating here is partly an act of diplomacy. It is a bit like being served a tasting menu of the entire animal kingdom, where refusing any course risks insulting your host, and where at least one dish is looking at you with more expression than you are comfortable with. The goal is not to enjoy the food. The goal is to honour the abundance by participating in it. Cheerfully, endlessly, one glistening slice at a time. And through it all you smile, you praise, you carve when it falls to you, and you keep the faint queasiness firmly behind your painted face. The meat is magnificent, excessive, and faintly menacing, and there is a great deal of it still to come. But not everything on this table is what it appears to be. Some of it wobbles, some of it gleams, and some of it is hiding a fish inside a trembling dome of jelly waiting for you. Somewhere on that table, catching the candlelight, sits a jelly. It wobbles, it gleams, and it may well contain fish. Georgian cooks adored setting all manner of things in shimmering aspic, from fruit to meat to seafood, then presenting them in elaborate moulded shapes. What looks like a delicate dessert could turn out to be suspended eel. There is no reliable way to tell by looking, and it would be rude to ask. So you take a trembling spoonful, commit fully, and hope for the best. This is a meal that keeps its secrets until the last possible second. Jelly was a genuine marvel in this era, and its appeal was tangled up in how much labour it demanded. To produce a clear, quivering, glistening jelly required extracting setting agents by long boiling, straining the result repeatedly through cloth until it ran crystal clear, then flavouring, colouring and setting it in a decorative mould. It was slow, fiddly, expensive work, which is precisely why the wealthy loved it. A trembling tower of clear jelly was proof of a kitchen with time and hands to spare. The moulds themselves were works of ambition, shaping the jelly into domes, spires and intricate forms that caught the light and dazzled the eye. A well-made jelly did not merely taste of something. It performed, catching the candle flames and glittering like an edible jewel at the centre of the table. The visual drama was half the point. You were meant to admire it before you ever disturbed it with a spoon. But here is where the Georgian table sets its little trap. Jelly and aspic were not reserved for sweet things. Cooks delighted in suspending savoury ingredients inside that same clear, shimmering set. Fish, shellfish, meat, and various things you would never expect to encounter quivering inside a translucent dome. A dish that looks for all the world like a sweet fruit jelly might, on the first spoonful, reveal itself to be studded with eel or crowded with prawns. This creates a genuine problem of identification, because from the outside these two very different experiences can look nearly identical. A gleaming golden dome could be a delicate lemon set, or a savoury concoction built around fish stock. There is often no reliable way to know by sight alone, and asking your neighbour what exactly this trembling object contains would betray the very unfamiliarity you're working so hard to conceal. So you're left to guess and to gamble. The polite course is simply to commit. You take a modest spoonful, you convey it to your mouth with a composed expression, and you accept whatever it turns out to be with the unshaken calm of someone who eats suspended eel every day of the week. If it is sweet, lovely. If it is fish, you register no surprise, no dismay, nothing but the mild pleasure appropriate to a guest of breeding. The jelly may betray you, but your face must never betray the jelly. Picture a dessert table where any given shimmering dish might be fruit or might be seafood, where there is no label and no polite way to check, and where reacting with visible surprise to a mouthful of fish would mark you as hopelessly unrefined. That is the quiet peril of the Georgian jelly. It is beautiful, it is impressive, and it is entirely willing to ambush you. So you navigate the shimmering minefield one careful spoonful at a time, rewarded here with sweetness, startled there by the sea, keeping your expression pleasant throughout. And if you think a wobbling dome of possible eel is the strangest thing this table has to offer, look toward the very centre of it, where a single piece of fruit sits in glory, more valuable than almost anything else in the room, and absolutely forbidden to you. In the very centre of the table sits a pineapple, and you are absolutely forbidden from touching it. In this era, pineapples were so rare and so ruinously expensive to grow in England that the wealthy displayed them as centrepieces rather than food. Some were even rented out for the evening, passed from party to party as a glowing symbol of status until they finally rotted. So there it sits, magnificent and untouchable, a fruit worth more than your monthly income. You may admire it, you may not eat it. It is the most powerful object in the room. To understand the pineapple, you must understand just how absurdly difficult it was to obtain one in the cool, damp climate of England. This is a tropical fruit that wants heat and sun, neither of which the English weather provides in reliable supply. Growing one at home required a specially built hothouse, enormous quantities of fuel to keep it warm, skilled gardeners, and years of patient effort, all to coax a single fruit into ripening. The result was a pineapple that had cost a small fortune to produce, because they were so staggeringly expensive, pineapples became less a food and more a trophy. The wealthy displayed them at the centre of the grandest tables, crowning their finest dinners, precisely because everyone present understood what such a fruit cost and what it announced about the household that could produce one. It sat there radiating status, a spiky golden declaration that the host operated on a level of wealth most guests could only imagine. And here is the detail that captures the whole mad logic of the age. Pineapples were so valuable, and eating one so wasteful of that value, that a trade sprang up in renting them. A single pineapple could be hired for an evening purely to be displayed, then returned and passed along to the next host, and the next, travelling from party to party as a shared badge of borrowed grandeur, until at last the poor fruit gave up and rotted, having been admired by half the county and eaten by no one. So the pineapple before you may well be a rental, a fruit on tour, appearing at your host's table for one night only before moving on to its next engagement. It is there to be seen, not consumed. To actually cut into it, to treat it as mere food, would be an act of breathtaking extravagance or breathtaking ignorance, and either way it would horrify the room. You do not eat the centrepiece. The centrepiece eats attention, and that is its entire job. For you, the guest, this creates a small and pointed cruelty. The single most impressive object on a table heaving with food is the one thing you're absolutely not permitted to touch. You may look at it, you may admire its improbable existence, you may reflect on the fact that it is very likely worth more than you earn in a month, and then you must return your attention to your allotted corner of lesser dishes and pretend not to want it. It is rather like being seated before a priceless ornament and told, without a word being spoken, that it is there to be gazed upon and never used, that its whole purpose is to be desired and denied. The pineapple is a monument to wealth so extreme that the fruit itself becomes decoration, too precious to waste on something as vulgar as eating, so you leave it be, glowing at the heart of the table, quietly outranking everyone seated around it, and as you turn back to your plate you begin to notice that the pineapple is only the most obvious example of a principle running through this entire meal. Sweetness itself in every form here is a display of fortune, and the more of it a host can afford to squander, the more powerful they appear. Sugar in the Georgian era is not merely a sweetener, it is a boast made edible. It was costly, imported through misery, and displayed as extravagantly as possible to signal how rich the host truly was. Grand dinners might feature towering sculpted confections, spun sugar decorations, and desserts built more like small buildings than food. The message was simple. We can afford to waste something this precious purely to amaze you. You're meant to gasp and then, if permitted, to eat the evidence of someone else's fortune. Your teeth, we will discover, are already paying the price. Sugar in this period was an expensive luxury, and its cost meant that to serve it lavishly was to display real wealth. The more sugar a host could pile onto the table, the more clearly they announced their fortune, because everyone present understood that all that sweetness represented a great deal of money quietly dissolving on their tongues. A generously sugared dessert was a form of showing off, no different in spirit from the pineapple or the turtle, and the wealthy did not merely sweeten their food, they sculpted with sugar. Skilled confectioners spun and moulded it into elaborate decorative structures, ornaments, and centerpieces, building confections that resembled architecture more than anything you would expect to eat. Sugar could be pulled into glassy threads, cast into shapes, and assembled into towering displays that dazzled the eye and existed chiefly to be admired for the skill and expense they represented. These creations sat on the table as edible monuments, little palaces of sweetness that guests were meant to marvel at before anyone dared disturb them. The point was excess made visible. A host who could commission a sculpture out of one of the costliest ingredients available, purely to decorate a single evening's table, was making an unmistakable statement about the depth of their pockets. It was wealth you could theoretically bite, though biting it felt almost like vandalism. The final course of a grand dinner leaned into this abundance completely. A spread of sweetmeats, preserved fruits, delicate confections, and sugared trifles arranged to overwhelm. After the parade of meats and the shimmering jellies, the sweet finale was meant to leave you dazzled by variety and quantity alike. It was the exclamation point at the end of the host's long, boastful sentence, and its message was the same as everything before it. Look how much we can afford to lavish upon you. For you, the guest, all this sweetness carries a quiet cost that the table politely ignores. The very sugar that signals such wealth is, at that moment, going quietly to work on the teeth of everyone in the room. The richer you were, the more sugar you could afford, and the more sugar you consumed, the more your smile suffered for it. Wealth and dental ruin advanced hand in hand, and we'll return to the grim state of the Georgian mouth soon enough. Think of it as decorating a party with stacks of the most expensive thing you own, sculpting it into a centerpiece, and inviting your guests to consume your fortune by the spoonful purely so they leave impressed. The extravagance is the entire point. The sweetness is almost incidental to the message it carries, which is always relentlessly about money and the ability to burn it. So you admire the sugar palace, you accept a portion of the sweet finale, and you let the costly sweetness melt away while performing the appropriate delight. You are, quite literally, tasting your host's bank balance. And as you swallow, it is worth pausing to consider what else, beyond sugar and status, has quietly found its way into the food you've been so dutifully praising all evening. The answer is genuinely alarming. Let us pause and consider what you are truly consuming, because the answer is genuinely unsettling. Georgian food was riddled with adulteration, as unscrupulous merchants stretched and coloured their goods with substances that ranged from useless to lethal. Bread might be whitened with alum, pickles brightened to a vivid green with copper, and cheaper wines sweetened with compounds of lead. You cannot see it, you cannot taste it, and there is no label to warn you. Every mouthful is a small act of faith. The rich died of their luxuries as reliably as the poor died of their lack. Food adulteration was rampant in this era, driven by merchants and producers looking to stretch their goods, cut their costs, and make cheap products appear finer than they were. There were no meaningful regulations to stop them, no inspectors, no labels, no way for a buyer to know what had been quietly mixed into their purchase. The result was a food supply shot through with additions that range from the merely dishonest to the genuinely poisonous. Take bread, the most basic food of all. White bread was prized as finer than dark, so to whiten cheaper loaves, some bakers added substances like alum, which improved the colour while doing nothing good for the person eating it. You believed you were buying quality, judged by that appealing paleness, when in fact the paleness itself was the deception, achieved through an additive that had no business being in your food. The colouring of food was a particular horror. To make certain foods look more vivid and appetizing, some producers reached for compounds we now know to be toxic. Pickles and preserves might be brightened to an attractive green through the use of copper, turning a simple relish into a small dose of poison. The very vividness that made a dish look fresh and appealing could be the sign that something dangerous had been stirred into it. Beauty on the plate was not always your friend. Drink was no safer, and here the deception could be lethal. Cheaper or spoiled wines were sometimes sweetened and improved using compounds of lead, which had the useful property of masking sourness and making a poor wine palatable. Lead is a cumulative poison, and drinking it in your wine, glass after glass, evening after evening, was a slow and invisible harm. The wine that tasted smoother for the treatment was quietly damaging everyone who enjoyed it. The cruel irony is that wealth offered little protection here, and in some ways made things worse. The rich consumed more of the fashionable, processed, imported, and elaborately prepared goods that were most likely to be adulterated. They painted their faces with lead, drank wine, possibly sweetened with lead, ate sugar that ruined their teeth, and consumed brightly coloured delicacies of uncertain composition. Their luxuries were killing them by degrees, just as surely as poverty and hunger killed the poor. Imagine sitting down to a meal in which you cannot trust the bread to be only bread, the pickle to be only pickle, or the wine to be only wine, with no way to check and no authority to appeal to, simply trusting that what you swallow will not slowly harm you. That was the reality beneath every fine Georgian dinner. The abundance on the table was real, but so was the quiet danger folded invisibly into it. So you eat and drink in good faith, because faith is genuinely all you have, and you may never know which mouthfuls were honest and which were quietly working against you. It is a sobering thing to consider between courses, but you cannot dwell on it, because there is a fork in your hand, and the way you are holding that fork is, at this very moment, being silently judged by everyone at the table. By now you are holding a fork and you'd better be holding it correctly. The way you handled your cutlery instantly announced your breeding to everyone watching, and everyone was watching. Use the wrong implement, grip it like a peasant, or reach when you should have waited, and the whole table quietly recategorizes you. It is a test with no answer key, graded silently by people who will never tell you your score. Your hands, once merely nervous, are now on trial. Try not to drop anything into the aspic. The handling of cutlery was one of the clearest and quickest markers of social standing at the table. How you held your fork, how you managed your knife, the ease and correctness of your every movement, all of it revealed in an instant whether you'd been raised inside polite society or were merely visiting it. There was a right way, absorbed from childhood by those born to it, and any deviation from that way stood out like a shout in a quiet room. The fork itself demanded a specific grip and a specific set of manners, and getting it wrong betrayed you immediately. Grasp it clumsily, hold it like a tool rather than an instrument of refinement, or wield it with the wrong hand at the wrong moment, and you announced your unfamiliarity with everything the table stood for. Those around you would say nothing. They would simply notice, file it away, and adjust their opinion of you accordingly. Then there was the matter of the knife, which carried its own hazards. Refined manners governed exactly how a knife was to be used, and crucially, how it was not. To bring food to your mouth directly on the blade of your knife, for instance, was the sort of lapse that marked you as coarse and ill-bred. The knife had its proper role, and stepping outside that role, however sensible it might seem to a hungry person, was a small public confession that you did not know better. The full array of implements only multiplied the danger. Different dishes called for different tools, and knowing which to reach for and when required a fluency that could not be faked under pressure. Hesitate over which piece to pick up, choose wrongly, or reach for the wrong thing at the wrong moment, and your uncertainty was on display for all to read. The cutlery beside your plate was less a set of tools than a small examination laid out in silver. And the timing mattered as much as the technique. There were conventions about when to begin, when to pause, how to rest your implements, and when to set them down, all of it choreographed by custom. Reaching too eagerly, beginning before you should, or handling your cutlery restlessly all spoke against you. The composed diner moved with unhurried assurance. The anxious newcomer, all fumbling starts and uncertain grips, gave themselves away with every gesture. Imagine an examination in which the questions are never spoken aloud, the rules were never written down for you to study, and the examiners are the very people sharing your meal, quietly marking you on the correct handling of objects they have wielded effortlessly since childhood. That is the trial of the Georgian cutlery. Your hands are being watched, judged, and scored, and no one will ever tell you how you did. So you grip your fork with as much borrowed confidence as you can summon, you keep the blade well away from your lips, you reach for nothing rashly, and you pray your nervous fingers do not send a morsel skidding into the jelly. The cutlery is a test, yes, but it is only one clause in a vast unwritten code of behaviour that governs this table, and the rest of that code is waiting to catch you out. There are rules at this table, dozens of them, and almost none are written anywhere you could have studied in advance. Do not overload your plate. Do not appear too hungry. Do not reach across a neighbour. Do not speak to a servant as though they are people, but do not ignore them so rudely that it reflects on your host. Every gesture is scrutinised, every small lapse remembered. It is like being dropped into an exam where the questions are invisible and the examiners are also your dinner companions. Relax and enjoy your meal, they say. You cannot. You will not. The first great rule is restraint, and it runs against every instinct a genuinely hungry person has. You must not overload your plate, must not appear eager, must not betray anything so vulgar as actual appetite. The well-bred diner approached the food with a kind of gentle indifference, taking modest amounts and eating without haste, as though a table heaving with delicacies were an everyday occurrence hardly worth noticing. Hunger, visibly displayed, was the mark of someone unused to plenty. Then there is the matter of your reach and your neighbours. You do not stretch across the person beside you to seize a distant dish. You do not lunge, grab, or extend your arm past someone's face toward the thing you want. Anything beyond your immediate area must be requested politely and passed to you. To reach was to invade, to disrupt the careful order of the table, and to reveal that you did not understand the choreography everyone else was performing. The servants present a subtler trap, one with no comfortable answer. You must not address them warmly as equals, for that muddles the strict hierarchy the entire evening depends upon. But neither may you treat them with open cruelty or contempt, because coarse behaviour toward the staff reflects poorly on the guest and worse, on the host who invited them. You must navigate a narrow path of acknowledging their service without acknowledging their humanity, and this balance was simply understood, never explained. Beyond these lie dozens more unspoken conventions, governing how you sit, how you speak, how loudly you may laugh, when you may begin and when you must wait, how you signal that you have finished, and 100 other small matters. Each has a correct form, absorbed over a lifetime by those raised within this world. To them the rules are invisible because they are second nature. To you they are invisible because no one ever told you they existed, and every lapse is remembered. The table is not merely eating, it is observing, quietly cataloguing each guest's fluency in the code. A single misstep might not sink you, but it is noted, and enough of them accumulate into a verdict. The company will smile, converse pleasantly, and refill your glass, all while assembling a precise private judgment of whether you truly belong among them. The warmth is real, so is the scrutiny beneath it. Picture being told to relax and enjoy yourself at an examination where the questions are never spoken, the syllabus was never shared, and the people grading you are also the people passing you the potatoes and asking after your health. There is no way to study for it in the moment, and there is no way to escape it, because escaping would itself be a lapse. You simply perform and hope your instinct hold. So you eat lightly, reach for nothing, treat the servants with exactly the correct measured coolness, and try to move through the meal as though you've known these rules all your life. It is exhausting in a way the food never accounts for. And just when the vigilance of eating has worn you down, a fresh trial opens up. Because now you're also expected to talk brilliantly and about nothing that could possibly get you into trouble. Now you must talk charmingly, wittily, and more or less continuously, without saying a single thing that could actually get you into trouble. Religion is dangerous. Politics is dangerous. Money is vulgar. Gossip is delicious but perilous, since the person you are mocking may be seated within earshot behind an enormous wig. The ideal is to be brilliant while committing to absolutely nothing. It is a tightrope walk performed with your mouth over a pit filled with people who would love to see you fall, and you have 3 more hours of it. Conversation at a grand dinner was itself an accomplishment, a skill as prized as any and as ruthlessly judged as your handling of a fork. You were expected to contribute, to be agreeable and engaging, to help the evening along with pleasant talk. Silence marked you as dull or sullen. Awkwardness marked you as unpolished. The refined guest kept the conversation flowing lightly and gracefully, like a person juggling while pretending it requires no effort at all. But the subjects available to you were hedged about with danger. Religion was perilous, capable of stirring deep and bitter division. Politics was equally treacherous, apt to set guests against one another and turn a pleasant table into a battlefield. Money was simply vulgar, a topic no refined person would raise directly. So the great engines of human interest, the things people actually cared about most, were precisely the things you could not safely discuss. This left you to navigate toward the safe and the pleasant, the weather, the arts, mutual acquaintances handled with care, the small agreeable observations that offend no one. Yet even these had to be delivered with wit and lightness, because being safe was not enough. You had to be safe and charming at once, agreeable without being tedious, engaging without ever wandering into forbidden territory. It was a narrow channel to sail, and the rocks were on every side. Gossip was the great temptation, delicious and perilous in equal measure. Talk of others, their doings, their failings, their scandals, was the lifeblood of society and endlessly entertaining. But it carried enormous risk, because in a crowded room the subject of your amusing remark might be seated closer than you realized, half hidden behind a towering wig or a floral centerpiece, and perfectly able to hear every word. A witticism at someone's expense could reach their ears in an instant and make you an enemy for life. So the ideal to strive for was a kind of brilliant emptiness, to sparkle, to charm, to keep the table entertained, while committing to no opinion that could be held against you and giving offence to no one within earshot or beyond it. You wanted to be remembered as delightful company and nothing more, leaving behind a warm impression and not a single quotable position anyone could later use as a weapon. Say much, mean little, offend none. It is rather like walking a tightrope with your mouth, performing feats of charm and wit for an audience that includes at least one person, hoping you will lose your balance and say the wrong thing. Every remark is a step out onto the wire. A clever one carries you further. A careless one sends you plummeting into a pit of people who will remember the fall for years. And you must sustain this performance for hours, alert and agreeable and quick, even as the wine works on you, and the heat rises, and your painted face begins its slow decline. It is genuinely tiring, this endless, graceful nothing. But you have little choice but to keep sparkling, because the moment your attention flags, someone raises a glass, and the evening's drinking is about to become a matter of obligation rather than pleasure. Someone raises a glass, and your evening quietly changes shape. Toasting was a serious ritual, and to be toasted was an honour, but to refuse to drink one back could be read as a genuine insult. So the toasts multiply, to the host, to the king, to absent friends, to the lady in the blue gown, to almost anything, and each one requires you to drink. There is no gentle way out. Decline and you offend. Comply and you are steadily, ceremonially getting drunk against your will. Your glass is refilled the instant it empties. There is no bottom to this evening. Toasting was a genuine social ritual, laden with meaning and governed by its own expectations. To propose a toast was to honour someone or something. To be the subject of a toast was to be publicly esteemed. It bound the table together in shared gestures of goodwill, and participation was not really optional. When a glass went up, the correct and courteous response was to raise your own and drink, joining in the collective honouring of whatever had been named. The difficulty is that refusing to drink a toast carried real weight. To decline, to sit with your glass untouched while others honoured the host or the king or a departed friend, could be read as a pointed insult, a withholding of the respect the toast was meant to convey. In a world where slights were remembered and offence easily taken, sitting out a toast was not a neutral act. It said something, and rarely something good. So the toasts began to accumulate, and there was no natural limit to them. A toast to the host, a toast to the king, a toast to absent friends, a toast to a lady present, a toast to almost any person, occasion, or sentiment someone cared to name. Each fresh toast summoned another round of raised glasses and swallowed wine, and any guest could propose a new one at any moment, extending the chain indefinitely into the night. The consequence for you is a slow and inescapable intoxication, administered by social obligation rather than personal choice. You're not drinking because you wish to. You're drinking because the ritual demands it, toast after toast, honour after honour, each one requiring its swallow. Your own preference in the matter is irrelevant. The etiquette has taken the decision out of your hands and placed it in the hands of everyone at the table who feels moved to raise a glass. And the mechanics of the table conspire against any moderation you might hope to maintain. A watchful servant or an attentive neighbour kept the glasses filled, topping yours up the moment it dipped, so that you could never quite gauge how much you had consumed and never found your glass conveniently empty at a moment of reprieve. The wine simply kept arriving, refill following refill, until the evening became a rising tide you could not step out of. Imagine a gathering where declining a drink is treated as a personal insult, where any guest may at any moment oblige the entire table to drink again, and where your glass is refilled the instant it empties so you can never mark how deep you're getting. You're being made drunk by consensus, ceremonially, with your consent assumed and your capacity never consulted. It is drinking as a contact sport, and you're on the field whether you meant to play or not. So you raise your glass again and again to the host and the king and the lady in blue and whatever else is named, and you feel the room grow warmer and looser and less steady with every honour paid. The toasts are only part of it, though. Beneath the ceremony runs a deeper current of serious, competitive, ruinous drinking, and among the gentlemen especially, that current is about to become a flood. Let us talk properly about the drinking, because there is going to be a staggering quantity of it. Wine flowed freely at these gatherings, and among gentlemen port was practically a competitive sport. Some men proudly boasted of finishing several bottles in a single sitting, a habit their bodies would eventually present them with a bill for. That bill was gout, the swollen, screaming joint pain so associated with the rich and their excesses that it was nearly a badge of rank. You drink because you must, because everyone is, because to stop is unthinkable. Your future toes are already weeping. Wine was central to a grand dinner and flowed with real generosity. but among gentlemen the drink of choice was often port, a strong, sweet, fortified wine that lent itself alarmingly well to excess. It was rich, it was potent, and it was consumed in quantities that would stagger a modern drinker. Port was not sipped so much as campaigned through, bottle after bottle, particularly once the more serious drinking of the evening got underway. Among men of this era, heavy drinking was not a private failing to be hidden, but a point of open pride. There was genuine boasting about how much a man could put away, and reputations were built on prodigious consumption. To finish several bottles in an evening and remain more or less upright was regarded as a mark of vigour and good fellowship, not a warning sign. The capacity to drink deeply was worn as a badge, cheerfully displayed rather than concealed. The body, however, keeps its own accounts, and it eventually presented the bill. Years of rich food and heavy drinking, of port by the bottle and meat by the platter, tended to produce a very particular and very painful complaint. Gout, an affliction of swollen, inflamed, agonizing joints, became so closely tied to the habits of the wealthy that it was practically a rank. To suffer from it was, in a grim way, to advertise a lifetime of the good living only money could buy. There is a bleak comedy in this. The very indulgences that marked a man as prosperous and successful, the fine wine, the abundant flesh, the port consumed in triumphant quantities, were the same indulgences that crippled him with pain in his later years. Gout became the signature ailment of the comfortable classes, a condition you earned by being rich enough to overdo everything for long enough. The reward for a lifetime of luxury was a swollen toe that shrieked at the slightest touch. For you at this table, the pressure to join in was as relentless as it was with the toasts. Everyone was drinking heavily, and to hold back to nurse your glass or beg off was to set yourself apart in an unwelcome way. Good fellowship was measured partly by your willingness to drink alongside the company, and abstaining marked you as cold, dull, or unsociable. So you drank because the room drank, because refusing was its own small failure. Picture a gathering where a man's worth is measured partly by how many bottles he can empty, where drinking to excess is boasted about rather than regretted, and where the eventual reward for all this triumphant consumption is a lifetime of agonizing joint pain regarded as the natural price of prosperity. That was the drinking culture of the Georgian gentleman. It was competitive, it was celebrated, and it was quietly ruinous. So you drink your share and more, feeling the evening tilt pleasantly and then less pleasantly around you, your future health signing away one comfortable joint at a time. But while you and the company drink yourselves toward a gout in the warmth and candlelight, spare a thought for the people who made all of this possible, labouring unseen in the heat below, whose exhaustion is the true foundation of your effortless evening. While you sit sweating gracefully in your finery, an invisible army is working itself to exhaustion to sustain the illusion. Down in the hot smoke-choked kitchen, cooks and scullery maids labour over open fires, hauling water, plucking birds, and building the towering feast you're casually picking at. Footmen stand silent and alert, ready to refill, remove, and replace at a glance. They see everything, hear everything, and say nothing. The magnificent effortlessness of the evening is a lie, and they are the ones sweating to maintain it. Begin in the kitchen, which is a different world entirely from the candlelit calm above. It is hot, loud, and choked with smoke from open fires that must be kept roaring to roast the endless meats and boil the countless pots. The cooks and their assistants work in this heat for hours, often for a full day or more, producing the vast spread that you upstairs will pick at politely and largely leave behind. The comfort of your evening rests entirely on their discomfort. The labour involved was staggering and relentless. Water had to be hauled by hand, birds plucked and dressed, joints turned before the fire, sauces watched and stirred, jellies clarified and moulded, sugar sculpted, and every one of the dozens of dishes brought to readiness at precisely the right moment. There were no machines to lighten any of it, only human hands, working fast and long in punishing conditions. The scullery maids, lowest of all, scrubbed the mountain of pots and dishes that such a feast generated, a task without visible end. Upstairs, the footmen carried the burden of the performance itself. They stood at attention through the long meal, alert to every need, refilling glasses before they emptied, removing dishes, replacing them, anticipating wants before they were spoken. Their role was to make the abundance of the evening appear to flow effortlessly, as though the food and wine simply arrived and vanished by magic. The whole seamless spectacle depended on their constant, silent, exhausting attentiveness, and they were expected to be, in a sense, invisible. A good servant moved through the room without drawing attention, present everywhere and noticed nowhere, attending to everything while seeming to be part of the furniture. You were not to engage them as people, and they were not to intrude upon your evening with any sign of their own humanity. They existed by design as instruments of your comfort, their individuality erased in service of the illusion. Yet these invisible people saw and heard everything. Standing silent at the edges of the room, footmen witnessed every conversation, every indiscretion, every lapse of manners, every whispered piece of gossip. They knew which guests drank too much, which ones quarrelled, which ones fumbled their forks. They carried the unedited truth of the evening in their memories, while maintaining faces of perfect blankness. The servants were the true witnesses to the reality behind the performance. Consider the strange arithmetic of it. A room full of powdered, corseted guests sits in comfort, praising the effortless grandeur of the evening, while just out of sight a whole workforce labours to exhaustion to produce that effortlessness, sees every unflattering truth, and is permitted to say none of it. The magnificence you're enjoying is not magic. It is other people's sweat, dressed up in candlelight and good manners. So as you sit picking at your fourth variety of bird, spare a thought for the world below your feet and standing at your elbow, the people making your evening possible, whose names you will never learn and whose labour you are meant not to notice. Their exhaustion is the foundation of your leisure. And speaking of things you are meant not to notice, look up now at the source of all this flattering golden light, because it too is quietly working against you. Look up. All that golden, flattering light is pouring from candles, dozens upon dozens of them. The wealthy burned beeswax, which was clean and expensive. The less fortunate made do with tallow, made from animal fat, which smoked and smelled faintly of a butcher's floor. Multiply any candle by a crowded room full of them, and you have real heat, real smoke, and a fug that thickens as the night wears on. Your painted face begins to slide, your wig grows heavier, and the whole glowing scene slowly cooks everyone inside it. Light after dark came almost entirely from candles, and the quality of your candles was, like everything else in this world, a matter of wealth. The rich burned beeswax candles, which gave a cleaner, brighter, sweeter-smelling flame, and were correspondingly expensive. Those with less made do with tallow candles rendered from animal fat, which were cheaper but smoked more, smelled of the fat they were made from, and filled a room with a distinctly unappetizing odour as they burned. To light a grand dining room brightly enough for a fashionable evening required a great many candles, dozens upon dozens of them ranged along the table, mounted on the walls, and blazing in chandeliers overhead. Each flame was small, but their combined effect was considerable, and not only in light. All those burning candles together threw off real, accumulating heat into a room already crowded with warm bodies in heavy clothing. The glow was beautiful. The temperature climbed steadily beneath it. That heat compounded everything else that was making you uncomfortable. You were already laced into stays, layered in heavy fabrics, and topped with a weighty wig. Now add the warmth of dozens of flames and the collective body heat of a packed room, and the dining room becomes a genuinely hot place, growing hotter as the evening wears on. There is no relief to be had, no way to shed a layer or step outside, only the slow, mounting warmth pressing in from every side. Your carefully constructed appearance begins to suffer under these conditions. The lead-based paint on your face, never designed to withstand heat and perspiration, softens and starts its slow migration, cracking and sliding out of the smooth mask you arrived in. Your powdered hair, warmed from above by the candles, grows heavier and less cooperative. The elegant self you presented at the door begins quite literally to melt as the night progresses, and there is nothing to be done but endure it gracefully. The candles contributed to the air as well as the heat. Tallow candles smoked and gave off their greasy animal smell, and even the finer sort added their own fumes to a room that was already accumulating a heavy atmosphere. Combined with everything else in the air, the burning candles helped thicken the fog that settled over the whole gathering, a warm, smoky, scented density that pressed against you with every breath. You were not merely in the room, you were marinating in it. Picture a crowded room lit and warmed by dozens of open flames, packed with people in heavy clothing, growing steadily hotter and smokier as the hours pass, with no ventilation to speak of and no way to escape the rising heat. Now, imagine your makeup slowly sliding off your face and your elaborate hair wilting above you while you maintain perfect composure. That was the physical reality of the beautiful glowing scene. It cooked everyone inside it by slow degrees. So you sit in the mounting warmth, your painted face quietly betraying you, breathing air grown thick with smoke and heat, and you smile as though perfectly comfortable. And the candles and their heat are only one ingredient in the atmosphere of this room, because to the smoke and the warmth you must add the smell of the food, the wine, and, most pungently of all, the smell of the people themselves. Nobody in this room has bathed recently, and by recently I mean possibly this month. Regular bathing was uncommon, and the answer to human odour was not soap and water but perfume, applied liberally and hopefully. So the air becomes a battlefield of competing scents, floral waters and pomades layered desperately over the honest smell of unwashed bodies in a hot room. Add the candle smoke, the rich food, and the wine breath, and you have an atmosphere with genuine physical weight. You could lean against it. You are breathing an entire civilization's attempt to hide from itself. Regular full bathing was uncommon in this era, for reasons both practical and philosophical. Heating enough water to fill a bath was a laborious business, and beyond that, there lingered a genuine wariness about immersing the body in water at all, a suspicion that it might be unhealthy. So people washed rarely and completely bathed even more rarely, going long stretches between any real cleansing. The bodies gathered in this warm, crowded room carried, quite simply, the accumulated smell of that infrequency. The response to human odour was not to remove it but to cover it, and the chosen instrument was perfume. Scented waters, pomades, and fragrances were applied generously in the hope of masking the smell the wearer knew perfectly well was there underneath. Perfume was less a luxury than a necessity, a fragrant shield deployed against the reality of an unwashed body. Everyone was doing it, layering scent over scent in a collective hopeful effort to smell like anything other than themselves. The trouble is that perfume does not eliminate an odour, it merely joins it. So instead of the honest smell of an unwashed body, you got the honest smell of an unwashed body, wrapped in a heavy cloud of floral scent, the two mingling into something more complicated and no more pleasant. Multiply this by a whole room of people, each with their own combination of natural odour and chosen fragrance, and the air becomes a dense, competing battlefield of smells layered upon smells. Now recall the conditions of the room, because they made everything worse. The heat from the candles and the crowd caused everyone to perspire beneath their heavy layers, and perspiration on an infrequently washed body intensifies precisely the odour the perfume was meant to hide. As the evening grew warmer, the smells grew stronger, the sweat working against the scent, the whole fragrant, pungent atmosphere thickening steadily as the hours passed. The room did not merely stay smelly, it ripened. To all of this you must add the other contributors to the air. The rich food gave off its own heavy aromas, the wine lent its fumes to every exhaled breath, and the candles, particularly the tallow ones, added their greasy smoke. Combine the food, the wine breath, the candle smoke, the perfume, and the sweat, and you arrive at an atmosphere of real, tangible density, a thick and layered air that pressed physically against everyone who breathed it. Imagine a hot, crowded room with no meaningful ventilation, filled with people who rarely bathe, all of them drenched in perfume to mask it, all of them perspiring into heavy clothes, the whole thick with candle smoke and the fumes of food and wine. The air in such a room has weight and presence. You do not simply breathe it, you feel it. A warm and complicated fug that is the combined scent of everyone's determined effort to smell like something other than themselves. So you breathe it in, this heavy perfumed haze, and you show no sign of noticing, because everyone contributes to it and no one may acknowledge it. It is the smell of the age, hanging over the candlelight and the finery. And there is one more source of unpleasantness to add to the mix, because when the people in this room open their mouths to speak or smile, what emerges is rarely as lovely as their clothes. Try not to smile too broadly, because your teeth are telling a grim tale. With sugar becoming fashionable among the wealthy and dentistry still gloriously primitive, rotten and missing teeth were common, especially among those rich enough to afford all that sugar. Some wore false teeth carved from ivory or bone, or even teeth harvested from the dead, which is exactly as haunting as it sounds. Breath, unsurprisingly, was often catastrophic, so conversation is conducted at a polite distance, behind fans, through closed lips. Everyone is smiling carefully. Now you understand why. The state of the Georgian mouth was, on the whole, dire, and the wealthy suffered for it in a particularly ironic way. Sugar had become a fashionable luxury, and those who could afford to consume it in quantity did so enthusiastically, sweetening their food and drink and delighting in confections. But sugar is merciless to teeth, and so the very people rich enough to indulge in it were the very people whose teeth rotted fastest. Wealth bought sweetness, and sweetness bought decay. Dentistry, meanwhile, was primitive to the point of being frightening. There was little understanding of how to prevent decay, and even less by way of gentle treatment for it. A troublesome tooth was more likely to be pulled than saved, and the pulling was done without meaningful pain relief. The care of the mouth was crude, painful, and largely reactive, addressing problems only once they had become unbearable. The result was a population of adults, rich and poor alike, with mouths in serious disrepair. For those who had lost teeth, there were false ones, and the story of Georgian false teeth is genuinely unsettling. They might be carved from ivory or bone, which yellowed and decayed in the mouth over time, but there was also a grimmer source. Real human teeth were used in dentures, teeth harvested from the dead, pulled from corpses and set into plates for the living to wear. To smile with a full set of teeth was, in some cases, to smile with the teeth of the deceased. The consequences for breath scarcely need spelling out. A mouthful of decay, infection, and ill-fitting false teeth of dubious origin does not produce pleasant breath, and the room you are sitting in is full of such mouths. Bad breath was widespread, and, in the close, warm confines of a crowded dinner, unavoidable. It joined the perfume and the sweat and the candle smoke as yet another layer in the dense atmosphere everyone was breathing and no one was mentioning. This grim dental reality shaped the very way people carried themselves. There was good reason not to smile too broadly, not to laugh with your mouth wide open, not to lean in too close when speaking. The careful, closed-lipped expression, the conversation held at a polite distance, the fan raised gracefully near the face, all of it served in part to conceal the ruin within and to spare one's companions the breath that accompanied it. Georgian reserve had a practical, pungent foundation. Picture a room full of fashionable, wealthy people, the very success of their lives written in the decay of their teeth, some wearing false ones carved from bone or taken from the dead, nearly all of them managing catastrophic breath, all conversing carefully at arm's length and smiling with their lips discreetly closed. The elegant restraint you admire in their manner is, in no small part, an elaborate effort to hide the state of their mouths. Refinement was often just concealment with better posture. So you too smile carefully, keep your lips together, and hold your conversations at a courteous distance, participating in the room's shared and unspoken effort to hide what everyone's mouth has become. And just as you settle into the rhythm of this careful, close-lipped performance, a shift occurs at the table, a silent signal that sends half the room rising to their feet and gliding away, leaving the rest behind for a tradition you will scarcely believe. At some silent signal that only the hostess seems to understand, the women rise together from the table and glide out of the room, leaving the gentlemen behind. This was the ritual of withdrawing, the moment the sexes separated for a while, the ladies to their tea and conversation, the men to their port and looser talk. If you are a woman, you follow the flock and hope you read the cue correctly. If you are a man, you settle in for what comes next. And what comes next is one of the least dignified traditions in the history of polite society. At a certain point after the meal, custom dictated that the company divide by sex. The hostess, at a moment she judged to be right, would rise from the table, and at that signal the other women would rise with her and withdraw together from the dining room, leaving the men to remain. This was the ritual of the ladies withdrawing, a well-established convention of polite society, and it marked a distinct shift in the shape and mood of the evening. The signal itself was subtle, an unspoken cue that the hostess gave, and that the other women were expected to recognize and follow at once. There was no announcement, no formal declaration that the moment had arrived. The hostess simply rose, and a well-bred woman knew to rise with her without hesitation or confusion. For a newcomer, this was one more piece of invisible knowledge to possess, one more cue to read correctly on pain of appearing out of step with everyone around her. The women withdrew to another room, typically to take tea and to enjoy their own conversation among themselves. This was their portion of the evening, a separate and more private gathering apart from the men, with its own tone and its own talk. It offered a change of company and a measure of relief from the formality of the dining table, a chance to converse more freely in a setting reserved, for the moment, entirely for the ladies present. The men, meanwhile, remained behind at the dining table, and their portion of the evening took on a very different character. Freed from the presence of the ladies, they settled in to continue drinking, and the conversation among them grew looser, coarser, and less constrained than anything that would have been permitted while the women were present. This was the men's time given over to port and to the franker, rowdier talk that the earlier company had held in check. So the single gathering split into two, the refined mixed company of the dinner giving way to two separate assemblies, each with its own atmosphere. The women took their tea and their gentler conversation elsewhere. The men stayed at the table with their bottles and their unbuttoned talk. It was a structured parting of the ways, built into the very form of the evening, understood by all and questioned by none. This was simply how a proper dinner unfolded. If you are a woman, your task at this moment is to follow the hostess promptly and gracefully, reading the silent cue and joining the withdrawal without appearing uncertain. If you are a man, you remain in your seat, refill your glass, and prepare for the more relaxed and considerably less genteel phase that the departure of the ladies permits. Either way, the evening has turned a corner, and the mixed formality of the dinner is, for now, at an end. And it is what the gentlemen do next, in that room they have just claimed for themselves, that truly beggars belief. For with the ladies safely departed and the port flowing freely, the men reach for something kept discreetly within the dining room itself, an object whose presence in that setting reveals just how thin the veneer of Georgian refinement truly was. Now that the ladies have gone, the gentlemen loosen their collars, refill their glasses, and reach for something kept discreetly inside the dining room sideboard. Brace yourself, because it is a chamber pot. Rather than leave the table and the wine, gentlemen would simply relieve themselves into a pot kept in the very room where they had just dined, carrying on their conversation throughout. Yes, in the same room. Yes, while others were still eating sweets. It is the single most Georgian thing imaginable. Unimaginable luxury and open barbarism sharing one table. You will never look at a sideboard the same way again. Here is a detail of the after-dinner gathering that reliably astonishes anyone hearing it for the first time. Kept discreetly within the dining room, often tucked away inside the sideboard, was a chamber pot, provided precisely so that the gentlemen would not have to interrupt their drinking by leaving the room. When nature called, as it inevitably did after all that wine, a gentleman could simply retrieve the pot and relieve himself without ever quitting the company. The remarkable part is that this was done in the very room where the dinner had taken place, and where the men remained drinking and talking. A gentleman would relieve himself into the pot, sometimes with only the most token gesture toward discretion, while the conversation carried on around him. The other men did not flee the room in horror. They continued their talk and their drinking, treating the whole business as an unremarkable feature of the evening. Consider what this meant in practice. In the same handsome room where an elaborate and expensive dinner had just been served, where turtle soup and refeathered birds and shimmering jellies had graced the table, gentlemen now stood and relieved themselves into a pot before returning to their port. The setting of such refined excess doubled, without apparent embarrassment, as a place to answer the crudest call of the body. Luxury and coarseness occupied the identical space. The presence of the pot was, in its way, a matter of convenience raised above dignity. Leaving the room would mean interrupting the drinking, breaking the flow of the gathering, stepping away from the port and the talk. The chamber pot in the sideboard removed that inconvenience entirely, allowing the serious business of after-dinner drinking to proceed without pause. That the solution was grotesque by any reasonable standard was simply not a consideration that troubled the men enjoying it. There is no better single illustration of the strange doubleness of this world than that chamber pot in the sideboard. Here was a society obsessed with rank, with the correct handling of a fork, with the precise depth of a bow, with 100 delicate rules of refinement policed relentlessly at the dinner table. And here, in the same breath, were gentlemen relieving themselves into a pot in the dining room without a flicker of shame. The refinement and the barbarism were not in conflict. They shared the furniture. Picture a room of exquisite manners, where a misused knife could damage your reputation, and a wrongly seated guest could spark a feud, in which the gentleman also casually urinated into a pot kept in the cabinet, mid-conversation, having just finished an elaborate feast. Hold both of those images together because they were both true at once. That contradiction is the truest portrait of the Georgian dinner party you will ever be offered. So the gentlemen carry on, drinking and talking and making unceremonious use of the sideboard, until at last they have had their fill of port and rough conversation. Then, flushed and unsteady, they rise to rejoin the ladies, doing their best to look as though nothing at all out of the ordinary occurred in that room. The evening, remarkably, is not yet over, and there are still reputations to be made and unmade before anyone is permitted to go home. Eventually the gentlemen stumble back to rejoin the ladies, redder in the face, considerably drunker, and pretending nothing at all unusual occurred in that dining room. Now comes tea and coffee, served in the drawing room, a gentler and more civilized phase of the evening. This is where reputations are quietly made and unmade, where the true business of the night, the gossip, the matchmaking, the alliances, is conducted over delicate cups. You must stay sharp even as the wine drags at your eyelids. The meal was the performance. This is where the scores are actually settled. After their interlude of port and unbuttoned talk, the gentlemen at last rejoined the ladies, reuniting the company in the drawing room. They arrived flushed from the wine, noticeably the worse for their drinking, and carrying themselves with the studied casualness of men determined to give no sign of what had gone on in the dining room. The two halves of the party became one again, and the evening settled into its next and gentler phase. That phase centred on tea and coffee, served in the more relaxed setting of the drawing room. After the heavy formality of the dinner and the excesses of the drinking, this was a calmer, more sociable interval. The cups delicate, the mood eased. It offered a change of pace, a softening of the rigid structure that had governed the meal, and a return to the mixed-mannered company of both sexes together, now in a more comfortable and conversational key. But do not mistake this gentler phase for a lowering of the stakes, because in truth, this was where much of the evening's real business was transacted. Freed from the fixed seating and rigid choreography of the table, guests could move about, gather in smaller groups, and speak with greater ease. And in those easier conversations flowed the true currency of society, the gossip, the assessments, the subtle advancement of alliances and connections that were the actual purpose of gathering at all. For all its polish and delicacy, this was a marketplace of reputation. Impressions formed here would travel outward through society in the days that followed. A guest who charmed the right people, who conversed well, who conducted themselves with grace through this final stretch, gained ground. A guest who blundered, who drank too obviously, who said the wrong thing in the loosened atmosphere, lost it. The drawing room after dinner was where the evening's verdicts were quietly reached and recorded. Matchmaking, too, found its moment here. The relaxed mingling gave families and interested parties the chance to observe potential matches, to encourage promising connections, to advance the careful business of marriage and alliance that underpinned so much of social life. Beneath the pleasant surface of tea and conversation ran currents of real calculation as the assembled company weighed one another as partners, allies, and prospects. The delicate cups masked a great deal of shrewd assessment. Your task through all of this is to remain sharp, engaged, and charming, even as the long evening and the enforced drinking drag at your attention. The temptation to relax, to let your guard down now that the formal meal has ended, is exactly the trap to avoid. The scrutiny has not lifted, it has merely changed rooms. This calmer phase is, if anything, where the most consequential judgments are made, and a lapse now can undo everything you carefully preserve through dinner. So you sip your tea, you converse with fresh energy you do not quite possess, and you navigate the currents of gossip and assessment with as much wit as you can still summon. And the evening, astonishingly, still has more to offer, because alongside the tea and talk come the card tables and the music, entertainments that look like harmless diversion but carry, beneath their charm, real money and real danger. The evening is far from over, Out come the card tables, and with them the gambling. Georgian high society adored games of chance, and fortunes could shift dramatically over an evening of cards, with some players losing sums that would ruin them for life. Someone may sit at the harpsichord, someone may sing. It all looks charming and light, but there is real money and real desperation moving beneath the surface. You smile, you play, you try not to bet away your dignity along with your coins. Entertainment here has teeth. Card playing was a beloved feature of fashionable evenings, and the card tables came out as a natural part of the entertainment after dinner. But these were not merely idle games for amusement. Georgian high society had a genuine passion for gambling, and games of chance were played for real stakes, sometimes very high ones. The pleasant image of guests gathered around a card table conceals the fact that actual money, often a great deal of it, was changing hands. The sums involved could be staggering, and the consequences real and lasting. Fortunes were genuinely won and lost over cards, and there are accounts of players losing amounts that would ruin them, that would encumber estates and blight families for years to come. What looked like a light diversion after dinner could, for the unlucky or the reckless, become a catastrophe. The card table was a place where a comfortable life could unravel in the course of a single evening. This lent the gambling attention quite at odds with its genteel surroundings. Beneath the elegant manners and the pleasant chatter around the table ran a current of real risk, real hope, and real desperation. A player on a losing streak was not merely amused. They might be watching their security dissolve card by card, all while maintaining the composed expression that good breeding demanded. The higher the stakes climbed, the sharper this hidden edge became, hidden always behind smiles. Alongside the cards came music, another staple of the evening's entertainment. A guest might sit down at the harpsichord to play, or lend their voice to a song, providing a genteel and pleasing diversion for the company. Musical accomplishment was prized, and the ability to perform gracefully was another of the many skills by which a person was judged. The music softened the atmosphere, lending the room an air of cultivated charm and easy sociability. Yet even the music was not entirely free of the evening's competitive undercurrent. Performing was another opportunity to shine or to falter before a watchful audience, another display of accomplishment upon which one's standing partly rested. A graceful performance enhanced one's reputation, a poor one diminished it. Like so much else at the gathering, the music that seemed a simple pleasure was also, quietly, one more arena in which the guests were measured against one another. Picture an evening of entertainments that appear light and charming on the surface, games and music to pass the hours pleasantly, beneath which run real money, real risk, and the ceaseless assessment of one another that governed everything these people did. The cards could ruin you, the performances could expose you, and all of it was conducted with smiles and elegant manners. The diversions of the Georgian evening were genuine diversions, but they had teeth, and the unwary could be badly bitten. So you play your hands with care, guarding your coins and your composure alike, and you offer or endure the music as the evening requires, staying watchful to the very last. And at long last, mercifully, the evening does begin to wind toward its close, though even leaving carries its own trials, because stepping back out into the Georgian night is a genuine hazard, and your bed is still a perilous journey away. At last, mercifully, it is time to leave, though leaving is its own small adventure. You gather your cloak, your aching feet, and your ruined composure, and step back out into the dark. The streets at night are poorly lit and genuinely hazardous, home to footpads who would happily relieve a wobbling, well-dressed diner of their valuables. Your link boy leads you home through the gloom while you sway gently, full of turtle, port, and regret. Somewhere behind you, the servants are still cleaning. Ahead of you lies your bed, and after that the reckoning. The end of the evening at last arrives, and with it the prospect of going home, which after so many hours of performance and drinking comes as a genuine relief. But departure is not a simple matter of stepping outside and strolling off. You must gather yourself, collect your cloak, and prepare to face the journey home, which in the Georgian night is an undertaking that carries its own real risks. Leaving the warmth and light of the party means venturing back into the dark, and the dark is the heart of the problem, because the streets at night were poorly lit and genuinely dangerous. Beyond the reach of the party's candlelight lay a city of shadows, and those shadows were not empty. Footpads, the street robbers of the age, lurked in the gloom, and a well-dressed diner making their unsteady way home was an obvious and tempting target. Your fine clothes, which announced your standing at the dinner, now announced you to anyone hoping to rob a prosperous traveller. Your condition scarcely improved your chances. After an evening of relentless toasts and free-flowing wine, you were very likely unsteady on your feet, your reflexes dulled, and your wits softened by drink. A wobbling, intoxicated guest, richly dressed and poorly coordinated, was hardly in a state to defend themselves or to hurry out of trouble. You made your way home diminished in every capacity that might have kept you safe, trusting to luck and to your guide to see you through the dark. That guide, once again, was the link boy, walking ahead with his flaming torch to light the path through the black streets. You followed his flame home as you had followed it to the party, placing your safety in the hands of a stranger with a torch, hoping that he led you toward your door and not toward a convenient dark corner where trouble waited. The same small uncertainty that shadowed your arrival now shadowed your departure, sharpened by your drunken vulnerability. And as you swayed homeward through the gloom, full of rich food and too much port, the party you had left did not simply vanish. Behind you, in the house you had departed, the servants were still at work, clearing the ruined table, washing the mountain of dishes, extinguishing the candles, restoring order to the rooms your evening had disordered. Their labour, which had begun long before you arrived, continued long after you left. Your night was ending, theirs stretched on. Your own night, meanwhile, was not quite over, because ahead lay the journey's safe completion, if you were fortunate, and then your bed. But beyond the bed lay the morning, and the morning would bring its own accounting. The rich food, the endless drink, the strain of the whole performance would all present themselves for payment in the hours after you finally lay down. The evening's pleasures were, every one of them, purchased on credit, and the bill was already coming due. Imagine ending a long and exhausting evening not with a safe and easy trip home, but with a hazardous stagger through dark and dangerous streets, drunk and richly dressed and vulnerable, guided only by a child with a torch, while behind you an unseen workforce cleans up the wreckage of your pleasure. That was the close of the Georgian dinner party. Even the going home was a trial to be survived. So you make it home, if luck holds, and you collapse at last into your bed, the whole ordeal of the evening finally behind you. But the reckoning has only been postponed, not escaped, and when you wake, every indulgence and every anxiety of the night before will be waiting patiently at your bedside, ready to present its invoice. You wake the next day, and every choice you made last night arrives to present its invoice. Your head pounds from the endless toasts. Your stomach protests the mysterious jelly. Your joints ache in a way that hints at gouty things to come. And beneath the physical suffering runs a quieter dread. Did you say the wrong thing? Sit in the wrong seat? Hold the wrong fork? Laugh at the wrong moment? In this world, an evening's dinner could echo through your reputation for years. You survived the party, Now you must survive what everyone remembers of it. The body presents its bill first, and it is not gentle about it. The endless toasts, each one dutifully answered, have left you with a head that pounds in time with your pulse, the natural consequence of an evening in which drinking was less a choice than an obligation. All that wine and port, consumed under social pressure and refilled the instant your glass dipped, has extracted its predictable price, and you pay it in full the moment you wake. Your stomach, too, registers its complaints. A meal of turtle soup, endless varieties of rich meat, shimmering jellies of uncertain contents, and sugared confections beyond counting was never designed to sit comfortably. Somewhere in that parade of dishes was food that was not agreed with you, and possibly food that was quietly adulterated with substances no one could see. Your digestion protests the whole overindulgent affair, and there is nothing to do but wait for it to subside. Your joints, meanwhile, carry a darker warning. The aches you feel are the early whispers of the affliction that stalk the well-fed and hard-drinking classes, the gout that was practically the signature of a life lived in luxury. Each such evening is a small deposit toward that eventual agonizing reckoning, another contribution to the swollen, screaming joints that awaited so many who dined and drank as you have just done. Your body is keeping accounts you cannot see, and the balance is not in your favour. But the physical suffering, real as it is, may be the lesser of your worries, because beneath it runs a colder and more persistent dread. Through the fog of your hangover, the anxious questions begin to surface. Did you say something you should not have? Did you sit where you should not have? Did you fumble your fork, laugh at the wrong moment, drink too visibly, misjudge one of the 1,000 unwritten rules that governed every second of the evening? The uncertainty is its own particular torment, and this dread is not mere morning-after paranoia, because in this world the consequences of a social evening were genuinely lasting. A misstep at dinner was not forgotten by the next day. It was remembered, discussed, carried through the gossip of the drawing rooms out into society at large, where it could attach itself to your name and shape how you were regarded for a long time to come. An evening's lapse could echo through your reputation for years, and you would have no way to call it back. So the true reckoning of the Georgian dinner party is not the pounding head, or the protesting stomach, or even the distant threat of gout. It is the days that follow, in which you wait to learn what impression you left, what will be said of you, whether you advanced your standing or quietly damaged it. The meal was the performance. Its verdict arrives afterward, delivered slowly, through channels you cannot control, by people who are watching more closely than you knew. You survived the invitation, the dressing, the poisoning of your own face, the perilous journey, the merciless seating, the parade of dishes, the endless toasts, the heat and smoke and smell, the chamber pot in the sideboard, and the dark road home. You survived the party. Now, in the aching light of morning, you must survive what everyone remembers of it, which may prove the hardest ordeal of all. So here we are, at the end of it all. You have survived a single Georgian dinner party, and what an ordeal it was. You were summoned by a card you could not refuse, laced into whalebone until breathing became optional, and crowned with a tower of powdered hair that may or may not have been inhabited. You painted your face with poison, staggered through dark and dangerous streets, and were sorted into your seat like livestock at auction, all before a single bite was eaten. Then came the food, that groaning wall of it. Turtle carried across an ocean to prove a point. Birds redressed in their own feathers to stare at you across the table. Jellies that might have been fruit or might have been eel. A pineapple worth more than your income glowing in the centre, forbidden to your fork. sugar sculpted into palaces, wine sweetened with lead, and bread whitened with things that had no business being there. Every mouthful an act of faith, every dish a quiet boast dressed up as dinner. And through all of it you performed. You held your fork correctly, reached for nothing, smiled with your lips discreetly closed, and sparkled with conversation that meant absolutely nothing. You drank because refusing was unthinkable, toast after toast, while the candles cooked the room and the perfume fought a losing war with the honest smell of everyone in it. You endured the withdrawing, the astonishing sideboard, the gossip, the cards with their teeth, and the long swaying journey home. It is easy to laugh at them, these powdered, corseted, poisoned people, and we have laughed at them tonight. But spare a thought too for what they were really doing. They were performing belonging in a world that could cast you out over a misused knife. They were chasing status through fruit they could not eat and sweetness that rotted their teeth. And below stairs, an invisible army sweated to hold the whole beautiful, ridiculous illusion together, one carried pot and clarified jelly at a time. So tonight, as you settle into your own soft bed, free of stays and wigs and the dread of tomorrow's gossip, take a quiet moment of gratitude. You can eat what you like. You can wear what is comfortable. You can smile with your whole mouth and refuse a drink without starting a feud. You can be mercifully entirely yourself, because history is gross and absurd and often quietly poisonous. But it is also proof that people will endure almost anything, corsets and lead and turtle soup included, all for the simple, stubborn wish to belong. Rest well. You survived the party, and you never even had to touch the pineapple.